So what we can do now is, rather than use a for loop, I'm going to use a slightly different method to extract this text from the header, right? So let's just create a new cell here and type tr0 just to see where we're coming from, right? All right, so here I could have created an array. So I could have created columns as an empty array. Then just the columns dot append this like so. So if I run this and I print the columns array, that actually gives me a list of all the columns, right? But another way to do this is to use the map function, right? And that's basically a higher order function that accepts a function as its argument and can return a function as well, right? So basically what map would do is, so this is a function within Python, right? So it's going to accept a function. Then it's going to apply that function to a list of items, basically, right? So if I have a list of items and I want to apply a function to every element in that list, then, rather than use for loop to apply that function multiple times, I can use the map function, right? And this just makes things look a bit cleaner, right? So what I'm saying in essence is, in this case, my function, I will define it as an anonymous function, right? And that's using the lambda keyword. So lambda x. So x in this case represents the arguments to my function. Then whatever comes after the colon represents what I want to return from the function, right? So I'd like to return x.text, right? So basically what we have here, item.text.strip, right? That's what I would like this whole function to return. So everything here is a function. This is an argument of the function, and this is the return value of the function, right? That's the first part we need to supply to the map function. Now, the second part we need to supply is the list of items that we would like to apply the function to. And that list is basically going to be, so if I scroll up a bit, that list is going to be a list of all the table headings. So basically this list. So if I copy this list, and let's paste it here for clarity. So you can see this is a list of table head tags, right? Or a list of th tags. So if I just copy this and paste, right? Then enter. This actually returns a map object, right? But I want to view my result as a list. So I wrap everything in a list. You see it gives the same results as using the for loop method, right? So the thing to notice is that I didn't have to create a special variable to, initialize an empty list at first. Then I didn't have to write a for loop, right? Then I didn't need to use the dot append method on the columns list, right? So it's basically the same thing, right? But it's just one looks cleaner, and in terms of performance, I don't think there's too much differences basically, but it just helps readability of your code basically, right? So this is, I can easily just name this my columns. Right, so if I type columns, then we get basically the list of all the columns we are extracting, right? So that's the first part. Now, how can we extract the actual data, right? Or should I say the rest of the rows, in this table? So if you remember, we have, let's see. So if you remember, we have this TRs variable, right? And that represents all the rows, in the table, including the header row, right? So we've been able to get the header row using TR0, right? Because we know the first row in the list is going to be the header row. And that's basically what we have here, right? Now, subsequent rows will contain the data, right? So those subsequent rows represents data rows. right? So what I'm going to do is, so I've extracted the columns from the header row. Now, so let's just type rows, and that's going to be TRs. So I'm going to use slice in here, and that's going to be from 1 till the end, right? So I'm omitting the first row because that's the header row. So now if I type rows, you see I have a list of rows containing TD, right? And no row containing TH, right? So that's good. Now from the data row, if I type 0, that's going to give me the first data row, right? Since rows contain only data rows, then if I put rows of 0, that will give me the first data row. So the challenge now is to see how we can extract, the data from a single row, right? If we can figure out how to extract the data we need from a single data row, then we can replicate that idea for all the data rows, right? So you see why the map is very useful, right? You just need to think of, a way to extract data for a single row. And once you're able to figure that out, you can use the map function to now replicate that idea, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is, so let's create a function, right? I'm going to call that function extracts row. Then just put CR, right? So this function is going to accept a single row, right? So everything we're about to do now, we are going to put all that logic into a function. So I'll scroll up a bit and hopefully I can get enough space, right? So for this first row, the first thing I need to do is get all the TD elements within that first row, right? And to do that, that's just rows 0 dot find all, and I want to find all TD, right? So you see, that actually gives a list of all the table data elements, right? I haven't obtained all the a list of all the TD elements. So very similar to what we did for the TH, right? What we just need to do is to apply that lambda again. So I'll type list, then lambda, right? So lambda x, and we're going to return x.text.strip. Now, which list are we applying this to? We're applying it to this list we just created, right? So it's going to look at each item, then extract the text. So I'll paste that right there, then enter. Okay, there seems to be, all right, so this has to be, so I'll just copy all the contents, then, so I'll cut, then type map, right? So then paste everything. So it's the map function that requires a function as its first argument, and the list of items that the function will be applied to as a second argument. So now you can see we're able to extract the country, the university name, the year it was founded, whether it's a public or private university, and the total number of enrollments, right? Then the last value here represents ref. That's this ref column right here. But you see that some of the rows do not have refs. And the first one we are actually extracting does not have a ref, right? So you see everything we have just extracted here represents this first row, basically, right? So this is how we extract a particular row. So everything we've done for the first row, let's put everything in a function, right? Because remember that as opposed to the case of the table header, where we only applied the function we wrote for a single row, in this case, we're applying this for all the other rows. That's all the data rows, basically. So I'll scroll up a bit, right? So for a particular row, what I did was to first find all, then apply this list to, apply this function rather to the results from the find all, right? Okay, so yes, I could just copy this So instead of row 0 now, this is just going to be TR because we are going to be passing the row directly into the function. Let's just call that row soup. Then our actual row data is going to be basically all this, everything we have here. Right, but now I'm going to replace this with the row soup. So let's just call it row soup lists. And let's just return that and see what the result looks like, right? So I'll type extract row. Then the row I'd like to supply is rows 0. That's the first data row. And you can see it returns exactly what we have right here. Right? So what our function does is accept a row and basically returns a list of the contents for that particular row. So it accepts a row tag and gives us a list, right? But we're actually not done yet. I would like to replace. So for the columns, instead of having a ref, right, I would like to have a link here, right? So what I'm going to do is just rename the last item in columns. That's columns -1. And let's give that link. So in fact, I'm going to cut that and just paste it right here and run it. And now if I type columns, see here we have ref, right? So this ref, I expect it to become a link. So I'll run it and you can see now this is a link, right? So so now in order to make the last item of the data row, the link I expect to find there basically. What I'm going to do now is, since this row is a list, I'll just replace the last item of that list with the link that I need, right? But how do we get this link? So if you look at the universities, right? So let me just scroll up a bit. So I'll click on this first inspection icon, then over on the first university, right? So you see that, so I'll just click on it. So you see that it's a table data, it's within a table data element, right? And it has an anchor tag or a tag. So this is the text we extracted, right? That's this National University, Bangladesh. There's actually, an href attribute here. So remember I said href attributes basically contains the link for the anchor tag, right? So this basically links to another Wikipedia page about the university, right? But let's see, if I click on this, you see that automatically it's attached the host name of Wikipedia to that href, right? So if I go back to href, you see href only starts from /wiki/National University Bangladesh, right? But clicking on it, since I'm clicking on that link within this same Wikipedia page, then it just appends the host name to the rest of the text right here. So what I need to do now is to find a way to extract this href, then append everything that should come before. So let's do here, everything that should come before /wiki/National University Bangladesh, right? So what I'm going to do is, just to make this a bit clearer, so I'll create a new cell here. Now, if I type rows 0, right, we have our first data row, right? Now, I'll find all the table data tags, right? So I have a list of all the TD tags. But you see right here, this is the TD tag that has the href. That's the link for the university. So this time I'm actually interested in extracting the href, right? So what I'm going to do is to select, so that's the second item, right? It will have an index of 1. And if I type enter, you see that I have just one CD element, which is the element that has the href for the university, right? So now how do I extract this link? All I have to do is, this is a table tag, right? So this element is actually the table tag, and this anchor tag is just a child of the table data elements. So if I type .href, sorry, .a, right, that means I'm trying to access the anchor tag of the CD tag, basically. So if I type .a, it just returns the anchor tag, as you can see. That's the anchor tag within that CD tag, right? So now that I have the anchor tag, how do I extract the href? Well, to do that, I just need to type dot attributes, that's attrs, then specify the attribute I want to extract. So if I specify title, for example, you see that it gives the title, the value of the title attributes, right? So let me just type Ctrl+Z. And if I just type .attrs without any square brackets, it gives a dictionary of all the attributes. So the anchor tag that was nested within the data tag we selected has just two attributes, the href and the title, right? But I'm actually interested in the href, so I'll just include href right here. And that gives me the value of the href. So what I now need to do is to attach the host name of Wikipedia to this value I have extracted from the href, right? And that's basically a string manipulation issue, right? So what I'm going to do right here is we have everything up to this point. That's tr.find.cd. That's basically everything right here, right? So what we just need to add is square brackets 1.a.attrs, right? So what I'm going to do is create a link variable. So I'll copy all this and paste it, then replace all this with row soup. If I print this out, let's print out the link. So if I run this cell, and I run the cell after it, okay, there's an error. Okay, this should be row soup lists. So run this cell after it. You see that we have the link printed right here, right? So that's how we extract the link for each row. Okay, so now that the link has been extracted, what I'd like to do is to now replace the last item, that's this last item, with the link, right? But I'll now append the host name of Wikipedia. That's everything that comes before wiki, which is HTTPS. So I'll just copy that. And so what I'm going to do is to replace the last row, which is -1. That's this row list here, then -1. It's going to be a F string. Then I'll paste the Wikipedia host name, right? But what I'd like to do now is I want to remove the first / here. So basically I would like to have this / included with what I just pasted here. Then everything that comes before it shouldn't start with a /. So in order to do that, let's see, we can use lstrip, right? That's to strip some characters from the left. And I would like to strip /. That's this first /. So if I run this now, you see that this doesn't begin with a /, right? So I'll just add that right here, .lstrip, then /. Right? So I know that here I can do my string interpolation, and whatever I put here would not start with a /. So I just put link right there. That's basically what we need to do, but I just need to add a condition here. I want the last value or the last item in the row, which is this item right here, to have this value if I'm able to extract a link, right? Because it's possible there's no href within the particular anchor tag for that row or for that university. So if there's a link, then I would like this value to be assigned to the last item of the row list, right? But if there isn't, then I'll just leave that as, maybe an empty string, like so. So if I run this and I run this cell again, you see that instead of an empty string, now we have the full link that leads to that page, basically. That's the page for a particular university. So I can click on this link and you see that it opens that university's page on Wikipedia, right? So you see this is just for Bangladesh, right? So let's try for another row, maybe row 35, and I enter. So this is for another university, Indonesia. And right, so we can click on the link. If I click on that link, you see it opens that university, Indonesia Open University, right? So I'll just close those two. All right, so we've been able to see how to extract the data we need from a single row, right? But how do we now apply this function to all the rows, basically, so all the rows in the table? Well, in order to do that, I'll create a couple of cells here. So in order to do that, remember that we have a rows list, right? Which is an array of all the table rows. So what I just need to do now is to apply this function, this extract row, to all the rows. So in order to do that, I'm going to use the list, then map. Now, if you remember, for the map function, we said, the first element in the map function has to be a function, right? And the second element is the list we are trying to apply the function to. In other examples I showed above here, I'm using a lambda function or an anonymous function as a function I'm passing into the map function. But now, the function I'm going to pass in will be the extract row function, right? Since it's also a function, right? It's just not an anonymous function, right? But a named function. So I pass extract row as the first item. And the second item is the list of rows, which is what we have named rows, right? So I'll type rows right here. And that's basically everything we need to do. So the function, this results or this line of code will give us a list of all the rows in the table, basically. So if I run that, okay, you can see we have the link printed. That's the print statement we had in that function. But we have a list of lists, right? And each list within the main list is just a row from the table, right? So we'll be able to extract all the data we need. So what I'm going to do now is I'll just remove this print statement, then run that cell again and run this. So no more print statements for link. So I'll run this next one. So you can see we have basically just our data, right? Each list represents a row. Well, we've been able to add I would say a custom row that is not included within the main table we extracted. So we just replace ref with a link, right? And this is the link here for each university, right? So we've been able to extract the data we need. So I'll just store this in a variable and call that data. So I'll run that. If I type data, you see we have this. And if I type here, so I'll just create a cell here. If I type columns, we have this, right? So you see that the position of each column represents the position of, each data point we have right here. So the first one is country. The second is the university name. The third is the year it was founded. The fourth is the university type, which is public. The fifth is enrollments, which is basically the number of enrollments. And the last column represents the Wikipedia link for that particular university, right? So that's all we need to do as regards extracting the data from Wikipedia. Now you might want to save this data as CSV or JSON file, right? So there are actually lots of ways you can do that, but let's just see how we can save the data as a CSV or JSON, right? And you can definitely use pandas to do this, but pandas is more like an overkill for what we are trying to do, right? So instead, let's just import the CSV module, which is part of the Python standard library. And let's also import the JSON module, which is also part of this the Python standard library. So we can use these modules to save, to write to CSV files, or to read from CSV files. But in this case, we're only writing to CSV files. That's in the case of CSV. In the case of JSON, you can read from JSON or write to JSON. So we'll demonstrate how to write to CSV and JSON using these two modules now. So I'll start with CSV, right? And the first thing I would do is use a context manager to open a file in write mode, right? So I'll just type universities.csv, and this is going to be in write mode. I'll alias that as F. So what I'm going to do is create a variable, call it CSV writer, and that's going to be CSV dot. Then I pass in the file object for the CSV file, right? So now I can use the CSV writer dot write row. That is, write row without S, right? Because I'm trying to write a single row now. So the row I'm trying to write now is column, right? Since within a CSV file, the first row represents the columns. That's if you want columns defined, right? Then I'll use the CSV writer again. Then this time use write rows with S. And now I'm trying to write the list of all the universities information, right? So I'll be using this data variable here. So I'll type data here and enter. Now we can see a universities.csv file created right here. So if I type on that, we can see all the data that we just extracted, right? But there's a space between each file. So what I'm going to do is, I think this is a Windows thing, right? So I'll just add a new line parameter and give that the value of MC string, right? So let's run that again. And now if I open this, you see we don't have the extra lines there anymore. That's for CSV. Now let's see how we can write the result as JSON. The same thing we did using a context manager. This is going to be universities.json. And it's also going to be in write mode, alias that as F as well. Then using the JSON library, I'm just going to type json.dump. Right, so the first thing I need to specify here is what I'd like to dump, the data list, basically. Then the first thing I will specify is where I want to dump the data to. And that's just the file object I've opened right here, right? And I'll just give this an indentation of 4, just so that we can, see all the data clearly. Then, yeah, I'll just run this cell. I see we have universities.json. So if I click on that, you can see a list of lists, right? And each list represents data, basically. And of course, there are ways you can just include the column names as well, right? And another method is, well, to use pandas, right? So if you want to load this into a pandas data frame, then we need to install pandas, right? So I'm going to run pip install pandas. All right, so now that pandas has been installed, I'll just move here and import pandas as PD, then enter. Then while that is running, I'll just create a df variable, then type pd.dataframe and pass in data as data, right? So the data parameter is going to be the assigned the data variable I have right here. And also the columns, coincidentally, the parameters have the same name as the variables I defined for those values, right? So I'll run that, and that's df. So if I try to print the df now, you can see we now have everything rendered as a data frame, right? So that's basically everything we need to do. And of course, with pandas, you can do lots of amazing things with the data. You can save as CSV or JSON, just as we have done. All right, so that brings us to the end of this video. We've been able to, see how to scrape our data from Wikipedia and to save the data as JSON and CSV, and even load the data as the pandas data frame, right? So there are, lots of other techniques, lots of other things you can do to extract data, but we are keeping things very easy now. So I hope you've been able to gain a lot from this video. In the next video, what we'll try to do is to load this data that we have just scraped into MySQL database, right? See you in the next video.